Hello and welcome to today's program, New Horizons for U.S., Korea, Japan Trilateral Cooperation. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jonathan Corrado. I'm the Policy Director here at the Korea Society. I'm joined with Policy Program Officer Chelsea Alexander. Good morning, Chelsea.
Morning.
Today's program is going to explore opportunities and limits for U.S., Korea, Japan trilateral cooperation. We're hoping to use this conversation to check in on what progress has been made since the Camp David Trilateral Summit in August and think about what tasks remain before us. It's worth remembering that just a few years ago, Japan-Korea relations were at a historic low point. Contrast that with today, where we see unprecedented levels of cooperation, not just talking points, but actions. In late October, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan conducted their first ever joint aerial exercise. Earlier this week, we learned that the three partners agreed to launch a consultative group on countering North Korean cyber activities. And it was recently announced that the three defense ministers will meet later this year to cooperate on a joint North Korea missile warning system. The spirit of Camp David further commits the three countries to other joint military exercises, more summits, and more cooperation on a diverse set of issues, like supply chains and emerging technologies. At the same time, we've also seen an unprecedented level of cooperation and proliferation between North Korea, Russia, and China, leading to some pretty stark questions about how the trilateral must adapt in order to stay ahead of these developing challenges. It's a difficult and important line of inquiry, and we are delighted to be joined by four experts who have all the answers. It's my pleasure to introduce them. First up is Dr. Katrin Fraser Katz, the Korea Society's inaugural Van Fleet Non-Resident Senior Fellow. She's former Director for Japan, Korea, and Oceanic Affairs on the staff of the National Security Council, where she served from 2007 to 2008. Welcome, Katrin. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Chung Kuyoun is Associate Professor of Political Science at the Kangwon National University. She previously served as a member of the Policy Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Unification, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and ROK Navy for good measure. Thank you for joining us, Kuyoun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Emma Chanlett-Avery is Deputy Director of the Asia Society Policy Institute's Washington, D.C. office and the Director for Political Security Affairs. Prior to this post, she served for 20 years as Specialist in Asian Affairs at the Congressional Research Service, where I served as her intern once upon a time. So thank you for joining us, Emma. Dr. Nishino Junya. Junya is Professor in the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Law at Keio University in Tokyo, Japan. He also serves as Director of the Center for Contemporary Korean Studies at Keio University. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we begin, thank you. Before we begin, I want to thank the Korea Foundation and our corporate sponsors for making this program possible. We are also taking your questions live throughout the program. Please send them in to policy@koreasociety.org. We'll get to that, and Chelsea's going to facilitate that conversation.
Yep, looking forward to it.
Katrin, you're up first. So I hope you could start with a big picture take on the significance of Camp David, now with a little bit of perspective to review what all the commitments mean and what progress has been made since that point. Looking forward, what else can we do? And we're aware of some political transitions and concerned about how to bake this progress in institutionally. So over to you for your thoughts, Katrin.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan and Chelsea. Wonderful to be with all of you this morning. Honored to be with this, very informed and experienced panel. Look forward to hearing thoughts from all of you. Happy to kick it off, though, with some kind of, framing broad thoughts. Jonathan, you already did a great job kind of teeing things up, so I'll hopefully not be too repetitive. But yeah, just to kind of set the stage, this, Camp David was truly indicated, historic high of trilateral coordination between these three countries, both on the new levels of depth and breadth in areas of cooperation, spanning security, regional cooperation, economic and technological cooperation, global health, people-to-people ties, just like broad and deep across the board. Secondly, a willingness to institutionalize this cooperation and coordination, an important standalone commitment to consult document, a commitment for these countries to meet at high levels and across various agencies, at least annually. High and lower levels. So, from the head of state level to defense, foreign ministries, Treasury, any stakeholders in this relationship, meeting across the board, multiple levels, right? So institutionalizing this new breadth and depth of coordination. And I think overall, these two things just really represent the degree to which this is a new era of cooperation, in that these countries recognize and are guided by shared values, common interests, and significantly a shared understanding that their security of these three countries is intertwined, which I think that commitment to consult really represents. So that's kind of, I'm repeating you, Jonathan, but just kind of saying like, this is historic. This is not where this trilateral has been before. To put a little perspective on it, the U.S. has for decades wanted to have trilateral coordination, has viewed its security commitments to Korea and Japan as entwined, but it's been difficult. It's been difficult largely because Korea and Japan have a number of unresolved historical grievances that have held up kind of the deep level of coordination, have created and kind of stoked mistrust over the years. As this panel knows well, as many of our viewers know well, this has been a sticking point and will remain a sticking point, that these historical issues are far from resolved. But I think, Jonathan, as you noted, new threats in the region, this is just a level of new stakes right now in this moment to not getting along that really pushed these three countries together for this new era. I won't go on too long. I want to hear from the others, but just, in terms of what has been done, there's a lot. You named a few of the recent developments, Jonathan. Already a lot of momentum across the board. I think one thing that jumped out at me was the joint statement condemning North Korea and Russia's arms transfers that came, shortly after the meeting between Putin and Kim Jong-un. Yep. What this all collectively says to me is, one, there's no foot dragging among the kind of these countries at the working levels. Like, there's this recognition that this is helping all of us. And so it's almost like this energy and wanting to go, sometimes after leadership meetings, it's like, let's do the deliverables now, let's deliver. And I feel like the momentum is there, and that there's also this kind of new reflexive default. The responses are quick. If a regional challenge arises, we've already seen a response, a default to pick up the phone, to coordinate a message, to trade notes on what's going on, and if needed, to coordinate next steps. So that's new. This is all new, and significant. You noted we came out of a historic low. Like, that's another really remarkable thing. Again, just quickly, what to do going forward. There's so much that we can talk about in this panel. I just think keeping up the momentum is important. I think it will keep up as long as this threat environment remains where it is. I think the momentum will keep up. It gives new tools to these countries that are really essential right now to respond to this really fast evolving threat environment. And when new issues arise, as they will, I think just, globally and regionally, I think the North Star of shared values that has been declared and a common purpose in peace and security in the Indo-Pacific should be enough to guide these countries. Importantly, I think they should really aim to not show any daylight in public between the three of them, because that only really serves the interests of this kind of so-called revisionist coalition between China, Russia, and North Korea. Yep. And so those are kind of my general thoughts. I mean, broad strokes in terms of next steps. And I'll stop there. I want to hear from others.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A great way to kick us off here. And just real quick, in terms of your personal career, you've spent decades tracking this particular issue. So this moment must simultaneously feel at once exhilarating, to get to this level where we've been hoping to get to for so long, but also a sense of fragility. Is that kind of the sense for you?
Absolutely. You can never kind of declare slam dunks, right? I mean, this is really significant, but we have to know that this is, you do, the fragility is, I guess, it's there's real strength here, but we need to tread carefully, and stay aligned. That not because we don't have this kind of, I think that the shared values, the common purpose, I think that's a solid bedrock foundation.
Yeah.
But we have domestic publics to contend with, to keep along with, kind of selling this, I think there's a lot to sell. I think there's a lot of compelling value here. But as we know in democracies, it's not all about just leaders, declaring things and moving forward. It's we have those sorts of things to contend with as well. And we have global issues that pop up in wildcard events that, these countries are very well aligned, but, they're independent countries with their own interests and pressures and shared interests, but, unique constraints in some areas. And so in those two levels, you have to that's where the coordination is so important. It just doesn't happen automatically, but this is institutionalizing that. So I think it buffers against some of these kind of shocks that we all know well from former decades of this relationship.
Excellent. Okay. Now opening to other panelists to jump in here. Emma.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Katrin, how you laid that out. And good morning, and thank you to Jonathan and Chelsea and the Korea Society for having me. Delighted to be here. I'm glad that we sort of touched, on the fragility at the end, because, not to throw cold water on this amazing historic moment, but there are definitely risks if these three leaders are not the ones at the table. And we can get into it later, but I venture to say that the U.S. is the biggest risk here. If we elect someone that is openly skeptical of alliances, then institutionalization is important. It gets a little bit harder to walk away from those commitments, but not impossible if you have a leader that doesn't believe in it. And also, just to underscore really quickly how critical the U.S. engagement is here to make this work. If you look back at past efforts just over the last, decade or so, you can say the U.S., end of 2015 Comfort Women Agreement, maybe we're a little too hot, too engaged, too ambitious. It's really tough to say this is going to be final and irreversible. We saw that sort of fall apart. A little too cold, maybe, with the GSOMIA and, trading disputes in 2019. So you could argue that this is just right, that the Biden administration has done some spade work initially to shore up the bilateral alliances and really make this work trilaterally. So I'm optimistic on that front, but always with a bit of caution too.
Excellent. Okay. Any other thoughts, Junya, Kuyoun, before we move on to the next question? Yeah,
actually, it was 2 years ago when Professor Nishino, Junya, and I joined some panels discussing this trilateral, exactly the same topic. And 2 years ago, when the kind of people asked us what kind of things two countries can do or three countries can do, and none of us can answer any answers. There are nothing we can do 2 years ago, but we can see that three countries are willing to do almost everything in the regions we can help with. And also we can explore the areas of cooperation beyond in the Pacific. I think this is a very good contributions and accomplishments for three countries. And as Katz and Emma actually mentions, three countries also agree that this should be institutionalized. They understand the importance of this three countries cooperation should be institutionalized. I think this is where we should talk throughout these panels and find a way how we can actually make this trilateral work solid throughout this year and beyond.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Junya, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate President Yoon's very bold action and the decisive measure to mend the ties between Tokyo and Seoul. And this Yoon's very bold action really contribute to the development of the trilateral cooperation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely a bold step by President Yoon. Now we're going to turn to Kuyoun for the South Korean perspective on trilateral development here. I want to get your take on the South Korean public's credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. A lot of troublesome polls about increased interest in an indigenous nuclear deterrent. The existence of any anti-U.S. sentiment or ambiguous, ambivalent U.S. sentiment, and how the public and policymakers are feeling about relations with China and Japan right now. So Kuyoun, over to you.
a lot to talk. And actually, I conducted several surveys about each of those topics, and so I have something to say. So before we actually, two allies, U.S. and South Korea, were on this Washington Declaration last April. South Koreans' public's attitude was pretty serious. They wanted to develop indigenous nuclear weapons, not only because North Korea's like a missile threats, which has been conducted more than 100 times in 2022 alone, but at the same time, South Korea was not reassured whether the United States will be there when South Korea was attacked by North Korea with missile or nuclear weapon, whatever that is. But this Washington declarations actually reassure South Korean public, and continuing this discussion in a trilateral format. Now we have this Camp David Accord. We have much tighter and much stronger kind of deterrence postures because we have agreed on this Camp David Accord. I think that's kind of big step, and because of this progress, South Koreans' kind of sentiments on United States as well as Japan has been much elevated, actually. But unfortunate thing is that right after Camp David, Japan actually kind of released this Fukushima wastewaters. That was a kind of a bad sign whether Japan is really with us. That kind of lingering kind of distrust was kind of raised one more time. But as we kind of continue our cooperation, like military exercises or kind of economy or other in the Pacific kind of issues, as we continue to kind of cooperate one another, I think South Korean public's kind of favorability on Japan and United States has been much better than the case in the year before. And when it comes to China, China is the number one country is most hated by South Korean public, I think. And especially for younger generations, their kind of attitude is very strong. They feel very upset about this Chinese behavior, not only because they see their behavior in the international setting, but also they are actually meeting South Korean college students are meeting Chinese students on campus. They are actually interacting with one another, and they feel they are very different. It's like they don't understand this rule-based order. So in that sense, this Chinese anti-sentiments about China is pretty significant, and it's much higher than North Korea cases.
And excellent points, and worth mentioning that prior to this, there's a new development, this anti-Chinese sentiment among the South Korean public. Prior to this, there's a lot of anti-North Korean sentiment. It's understandable. Also, a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment as well. But now the anti-Chinese sentiment has really surpassed that. And this seems to be a kind of a durable trend, not just a whiplash reaction to the THAAD sanctions, informal sanctions that China leveled on South Korean firms. But kind of a longer dwelling trend that will continue to impact the way that the South Korean policymakers approach their relationship bilaterally with China.
So I think this anti-China sentiment, it is not necessarily hostility, but it kind of has kind of longer lasting, as you said, can impact on South Korean public's attitude. Not only because we don't have that much good memory with China, interactions with China. We have since 2016, we have the THAAD deployment dispute. And also we have environmental issue as well, which is kind of dust coming from China. So it's a kind of not just tragic threat, but also kind of everyday of lives. We receive this threat from China. So, and also we observe their behavior in the international setting, as in the case of South China Sea. Right. So all of this kind of phenomenon constitute this anti-China sentiment in South Korea.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, Kuyoun. Open to other thoughts on these issues. Once again, we're looking at South Korea's perspective on these developments, including trilateral relations and some of the adversaries in the region.
I'll just say that's really helpful as you lay that out, and it's definitely remarkable that the South Korean public is viewing China in a really different way. Again, though, I still think the jury is still out. Like, we're not exactly on the same page, I would say, in how we view China strategically. The U.S. and Japan, I think, tend to be a little bit more aligned on this. So you'll just see, it's nuanced, but there's differences in how we frame, the joint statements between the U.S. and ROK and the U.S. and Japan, for example. And once you get into extended deterrence issues, it's a whole, sort of hornet's nest of talking. But I again will point to the importance of the management of this alliance. The Washington Declaration, to me, I think it's not to be too pat, but it's sort of it's buying time, if nothing else. I think there's an enthusiasm to some extent in the South Korean public for developing their own nuclear weapons. The threats are becoming much more acute. There's concern about the durability of the U.S. presence and commitment to the region. But I think, again, it's worth it. It's very worth it to at least try and shore up these assurances for South Korean security in the meantime.
Very good point. And also worth mentioning how this issue, especially China relations and Japan relations, is politicized in South Korea, right? Differences of opinion from Minju-dong, the Democratic Party policymakers, versus People's Power Party, President Yoon Suk-yeol's administration. So differences there. And yet we saw the first mention in a U.S.-ROC joint statement of Taiwan was with President Moon Jae-in's administration. So on the Democratic side, still taking that bold step to make that inclusion. So it seems like we're going in this direction anyhow, but just a little bit of difference in terms of how far and how fast. Katrin, I saw you had a point earlier.
Yeah, really excellent points. And I kind of I thank you for that overview from the South Korean perspective. And Emma, I also really fully agree with your comments. It just kind of struck me that in the lead up to this Camp David summit, of course, there was a lot of focus on, this Korea-Japan leg needed to be strengthened as a necessary condition. But the U.S.-Korea one really had to be strengthened as well. To Emma's point, this is something that needs to be tended to. It can be fragile also, as Kuyoun had noted. The support, increasing support within South Korea for developing their own nuclear weapons, the need to shore up extended deterrence. I would just say historically, this alliance has weathered similar periods in the past when there was concerns about, U.S. abandonment, during the Cold War, like the U.S. kind of not having the commitment to the Korean Peninsula, and assurances of the nature of like the Washington Declaration, as much as they might not be final and forever, were always essential. They really played a really key role in, sometimes it's words, it's statements on a page, but they played a really key role in these kind of declaratory statements of the U.S. like, we are here, we stand by you. Yes, we are not totally buffered against future shocks and future administrations, but I think putting kind of a kind of a stick in the sand at this point, saying this is where we are now, is at least a very important orienting point for the alliance, and something that was necessary for Camp David to move forward.
Excellent points. Okay. I want to get to, Junya, do you have any remarks on that one?
Yes, as Kuyoun mentioned, there's still a negative sentiment in South Korea towards the Japan, and there's also in a way wider perception gap between the South Korea's policy decision makers and the public, the general citizen. Actually, this is a kind of concern from the Japanese perspective. I really want President Moon and his aide to make more effort to explain and persuade public citizen about the importance of the South Korea's relationship with Japan. And also, I also want Prime Minister Kishida to pay more, in a way, sincere attitude, and to take more sincere step in addressing the wartime labor issue. Thank you.
Yeah, a very even-handed suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any final remarks before we move on to Emma to talk about some more regional stuff?
Well, when it comes to Taiwan issue, I think that was actually a big step for South Korea, even for the Yoon administration, because we also share this threat perception toward China with US and Japan. But at the same time, we have very nuanced approach because of this North Korea issue, I think. Because when something happens in Taiwan, what types of either types of Taiwan contingency, I think South Korean tends to think that something could happen to Korean Peninsula as well. North Korea might take opportunistic behavior or kind of a contingency around Korean Peninsula with or without coordination with China. So that concern actually raised Korea to be taking more nuanced approach to China policy, I think.
And I think that this trilateral forum is the perfect place to address those concerns and start. Marcus Garlauskas at the Atlantic Council has done a lot of work on simultaneity. The chance that this could happen and the need for the U.S. and its allies to start thinking through that early and making the right types of contingency. And we really have to open the Overton window a little bit about what is acceptable policy conversation on advanced planning for that type of, fighting a two-front war. Could it be possible? And then what are the different roles for the U.S. And its alliance partners in Northeast Asia? It opens up some really tough political questions that are probably best addressed in closed door rooms for now, but that need to happen sooner rather than later. So that's a great point to bring up, Kuyoun. Thanks for that. Okay, and we're going to keep going in this direction. And Emma, we're going to turn to you. So I want to ask, what kind of ripple effects does this trilateral cooperation have throughout the Indo-Pacific? How are China and North Korea reacting? We can see the solidification of some rival blocs in Northeast Asia. And then on the positive side, how about ASEAN and Taiwan? How were they reacting to this trilateral development?
Sure, that's a big basket of things to address. Well, as expected, China is displeased with this development. I mean, for years, every time there's some indication of alliance strengthening or upgrading, China labels it as anachronistic and a Cold War mentality. But lo and behold, we find ourselves in a bit more of a Cold War type atmosphere here. So after the Camp David settlement, China did flex its muscles a little bit, had a pretty large military exercise, although that was also reacting to the Taiwanese vice president visiting the United States, I believe. I think that North Korea called this nuclear war provocation, so lots of hostile words, indicating their discomfort with the trilateral alignment that we saw at Camp David. But I think that, it's their future actions that are really going to determine how far this trilateral cooperation can go. And it's sort of, on one side, there's retaliation. On the other side, there's negotiation. I think they both would threaten trilateral coordination. Let me unpack that a little bit. If there is true retaliation from China, like the THAAD reaction that you referenced before, that understandably is really hard for South Korea to take. That's almost existential in terms of their dependence there. So that would really test, I think, the ROCs if China decided to do a really concerted retaliatory effort against South Korea. And on the other side, even though this seems not likely to happen anytime very soon, is if North Korea decides to come back to the negotiating table. It is always hard to maintain trilateral cooperation and good relations when North Korea is negotiating. When they're acting, irresponsibly and launching provocations, it's like the gift that keeps giving for trilateral coordination. That's when we can actually come together, even when otherwise relations are not good. We do all have different priorities when it comes to North Korea, and those, become much more stark if North Korea actually wants to negotiate. Again, they're not acting like they want to do this anytime too soon. So maybe in that sense, it's helpful for maintaining some cohesion among the three. ASEAN, just briefly, poor ASEAN, it's always at the end, and briefly, but Generally, I think that ASEAN likes for the U.S. and their allies to be getting along. It brings some degree of stability. If we can do more coordinated action in Southeast Asia, it's all to the better. I've sort of been doing a little work on Japan's role in Southeast Asia and the U.S. basically reaping some of the benefits of Japan's different approach to Southeast Asia. If we can do that in a three-way, I think that that's all the better. We need to not leave behind that region in the overall competition with China. Taiwan, I don't pretend to be a Taiwan expert at all, but again, I think that it when there were shoring up our treaty alliances there, that brings a degree of comfort to Taiwan. They also don't want, though, for this to get so hot that it provokes China in some way. That's my general sense on Taiwan, but I am happy to have someone disagree with me on there because I have not spent enough time on that issue. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emma. Opening up now for more conversation about regional ripple effects that this trilateral cooperation could possibly have. If nothing, we can keep rolling. Let's move on to Junya. So Junya, over to you for Japanese perspective and a bit more on the spirit of Camp David Trilateral Joint Statement. So want to ask what's different this time compared to past efforts? And then what is Japan's point of view on the utility and durability of this effort?
Thank you. We already discussed the first important point is the institutionalization. And the second one is the, in a way, comprehensiveness, mainly focusing on the cooperation in the Pacific the region. And actually, this third point is quite interesting and important for me. The third statement at the Camp David, commitment to consult. In my view, this is a very quite important statement. Because the past period, we three countries had in a way military joint exercises, but not so, how can I say, fostered. Very low key. The military drill was held in the past period, but now, so as Jonathan already mentioned, we first ever aerial trilateral drill, and we now try to complete real-time information sharing of the North Korean missile data. And now due to the new agreement of the commitment to consult, now we need to consult when something happened, not only on the peninsula, Korean peninsula, but also in the Taiwan Strait. So this means the very very important, because now we needed to address in a way squarely very sensitive military cooperation, not only trilateral framework, but also bilateral framework between Japan and South Korea. And I really interested in the President Yoon's Liberation Day speech 3 days before Camp David summit. So in Liberation speech, President Yoon mentioned the importance of the role of role of UNC, United Nations Command real bases in Japan. So I think this President Yoon's remarks and the Camp David statement is really, in a way, can connect it in a very broader framework. So now we needed to focus more on this kind of the military cooperation aspect. Thank you. And from the Japanese point of view, yes, now we've seen the rapid the development and improvement of bilateral ties between Tokyo and Seoul. So based on this rapid development of bilateral ties, now we can move forward more than past. But at the same time, as we already discussed, from the Japanese perspective, our concern is that President Yoon's political stability in the very polarized South Korea's domestic politics. Especially next year, April, President Yoon, South Korea, will have a general election. And at this point, according to the opinion poll, ruling party will have a very severe, may have a very severe result. Many Japanese experts and policymakers are really concerned about the result of the South Korea's general election next year, April. And this result may negatively affect not only the bilateral cooperation, but also the trilateral cooperation. And also, not only Japanese, but also many South Koreans are really, in a way, pay attention to the result of the U.S. presidential election next November. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Junya. And am I right to suspect that this issue is not as politicized and controversial in Japan among the general public compared to the extent that it is in Korea?
Yes, according to the opinion poll, now majority of Japanese really support current bilateral ties and really appreciate Yoon's strong leadership. But still, especially the defense expert, still have, in a way, negative sentiment towards South Korea because in a way, we had a very deteriorated relations during the Moon administration, and the so-called radar lock incident in 2018 still have a very bad memory for many Japanese defense experts. But in my personal view, now the South Korea's and the Japanese defense ministries, in a way, try to address this issue and almost agreed to move forward beyond this very unfortunate incident in 2018. In a way, a bilateral defense cooperation, I'm relatively optimistic at this point than other defense experts in Japan. Thank you.
Excellent. Can I just ask you to unpack one last thing? And that's that you mentioned Yoon's Liberation Day speech, talking about a bigger role for UN Rear Command on future peninsula issues. Can you just unpack that a little bit, explain for our audience what that's all about?
Well, many experts really acknowledge this very security structure in this region, especially the United Nations Command Rear-based role in Japan. So something happened on the Korean Peninsula. U.S. forces in Japan dispatched to the Korean Peninsula from this UNC Rear bases. But as far as I know, majority of South Korean does not know this fact, and still they do not acknowledge this very structural linkage and the importance of the military relationship between Japan and South Korea. But now President Yoon, they openly try to discuss about this issue and try to gain support from the South Korea's public regarding this issue. In a way, at this point, this is a very good opportunity for President Yoon to persuade South Korea's public opinion, because now, as far as I know, many South Koreans really concerned about the security issues by watching the situation in Ukraine and other areas. Now, many South Koreans really support trilateral security cooperation than ever. And at this point, I think President Yoon tried to gain more support, not only trilateral effort, but also bilateral security cooperation between Tokyo and Seoul. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so open to any other thoughts on this topic. Yeah, Kuyoun.
Yeah, actually, UNC Rare Command has been less discussed in South Korean discourses, even between elite level or expert level. UNC Rare issue has been quite less explored. Even if it has been researched, it has been kind of classified because mainly this idea of UNC Rare is pretty important, as Professor Nishino mentions. When something happens in Korean Peninsula, even for the Taiwan, all the military forces will be dispatched from this area as well. So understanding the role of UNC Rare is pretty important concerning, given the situations in Northeast Asia is pretty unstable because of North Korea as well as China, and also we have Russia. But this UNC Rare has been kind of less explored because of this idea that, Japanese forces, ground forces might enter South Korean territory. That kind of things, kind of psychological taboo for South Korean public because it reminds us of this colonization period. But I think President Yoon tried to move beyond that kind of psychological constraint. And now we try to build a more future-oriented relationship with Japan, given that the security situations in Northeast Asia is pretty serious. We have all different types of threats, all different types of authoritarian actors, and now we have this trilateral moments, and we now to take more practical kind of measure to discuss this UNC Rare.
Excellent. Great thoughts. Any last thoughts before I move on to the next round?
I wonder I could just pose a question maybe to Nishino-san, because I have not been able to quite understand like the extent to which Kishida is vulnerable on his right flank, especially. I mean, he was sort of traditionally seen as a little bit more of a dovish guy, and I wonder how risky this was for Kishida to go out on this limb and be willing to sign on.
I would say that the Kishida cabinet is now taking the Abe's policy, especially regarding the security policy. But at the same time, in my personal view, Prime Minister Kishida also tried to strike a balance in a way, not only strike a balance between the US and China. So yes, Japan's top priority is always relationship with the United States. But at this point, the Kishida-san, Prime Minister Kishida, is trying to establish this healthy and stable relationship with China and try to realize CJK, China, Japan, Korea Trilateral Summit with President Yoon Song-yeol. So kind of by exercising joint initiative in this region. So in this context, I would say that yes, Kishida-san is taking a very in a way strong defense posture vis-a-vis China, not only vis-a-vis China but also against North Korea. But at the same time, trying to in a way make a more, how can I say, harmonized situation in the Pacific. So as you well know, Kishida-san also delivered his speech at India the past March, the new plan for the free and open in the Pacific. So I think yes, in a way, Kishida-san is taking a very strong defense posture, but at the same time, he tried to, in a way, more, how can I say, establish the more stable regional order by exercising his liberal leadership. Thank you.
All right. Thanks you so
That's
much.
helpful.
All right. Katrin, did you have something?
I do. This has been really helpful and kind of and interesting. I mean, I think particularly thinking about, this critical issue of domestic vulnerability. And Junya, you had mentioned particularly President Yoon's going into the general elections. in the spring. I mean, it's interesting just to think about the ruling party already being in the minority, but of course it could, get worse, and think about the implications of that. But it kind of led to a question for Kuyoun, if that's okay for me. I'm just thinking, I'm wondering the degree to which, yes, President Yoon is vulnerable on the Korea-Japan side. The forced labor agreement is very unpopular domestically. The opposition is certainly going to take advantage of that. I'm wondering, though, the degree to which one thing in particular might play to his favor, and that is how, the kind of global pivotal statesman that he is working so hard. I mean, how many countries he has visited, he's going to go from the US and APEC this week, I think, to the UK, and some first state visits going on for South Korea. That's something that crosses party lines in terms of kind of pride in South Korea, rightfully so, a kind of sense of national pride and being able to have and step up on the global stage. I wonder to the degree to which that might play to his favor in this upcoming election, again, in the context of vulnerability. And over time, I guess also, I think one other thought I had is, post 1998, which is the Kim Obuchi statement, which is in some ways a parallel to Camp David, a statement of cooperation at that time. There was a flourishing of people-to-people ties. I actually taught in South Korea following that statement, and it was an opening of cultural exchange of books from Japan. I had students who were seeing Japanese manga for the first time, and this exchange of cultural items. So I just wonder the degree to which the Camp David summit, perhaps not something that's going to move the needle in the elections as soon as this spring, but the degree to which that kind of opening up of exchange and people-to-people ties and tourism and that kind of thing might also help over time to buffer against domestic shocks again over the longer period.
That's a good question, I think. When it comes to the first questions, and foreign policy has been polarized in South Korea as well. So if you ask conservative voters, what is the kind of best kind of accomplishments of President Yoon, they will say, conservatives will say foreign policy. Because it actually tried to visualize this idea of global pivotal states, and also the reconciliation with Japan and Trilateral, and also we actually aligned with NATO. We are kind of far-reaching, kind of beyond Asia. So the idea of global pivotal state has been well received in the conservative bloc, but from progressive liberal bloc does not really idea of this global pivotal states. They perceive it as more like a U.S. aligned strategy rather than we have our own strategy. It's more like a pro-U.S., more U.S. aligned. We are just bandwagoning to United States a kind of power. So that kind of different idea and polarization actually makes I don't know how it can be put into the kind of voting card calculations, but it has been polarized. And when it comes to people-to-people exchange, I think it is a good idea because even before this trilateral kind of cooperation begins, South Koreans, every South Koreans and every Japanese public, they interacted all the time because, we travel Japan all the time, and Japanese people actually travel to South Korea. That was pretty normal. And because of this trilateral, I think we have more momentum to kind of sustain this people-to-people exchange. I think that could be the kind of good foundation so that we can, maintain this momentum.
Thank you.
Right. I love when panelists start asking one another questions. That means that we've generated this kind of organic momentum. Love it. So I'll just ask one more question, and that's on DPRK Russia and how the Trilat can and will respond to that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea to do the audience questions. So I'd like to read the response from Chae Sun-hee, that's North Korea's foreign minister, after U.S., Korea, Japan released the trilateral statement condemning North Korea and Russia for their arms proliferation. North Korea, of course, sending artillery. We think 1 million rounds, enough for 2 months worth of Russian bombardments against Ukraine, and also potentially some short-range ballistic missiles as well. The South Korean military has said that we think that those types of transfers are also occurring. And then the other way, could also happen, right? Russia to North Korea proliferation on things like satellites, intercontinental ballistic missiles, targeting systems, MIRVs, all kinds of exotic and advanced capabilities that are really going to evolve the North Korean threat and challenge the ability of the allies to defend and deter against. So here's Chae Sun-hee's reaction to that joint statement. DPRK-Russia relations are aimed at promoting the well-being of the peoples of the two countries and do not target a third country. But if peace and security in the region are endangered due to the persistent moves of the US, Japan, and Korea for instability, they, DPRK and Russia, will act as powerful strategic stability element to contain such a situation. So a bit of an implicit threat there, saying that North Korea and Russia will work together to respond to a contingency if the trilat, US, Korea, Japan, creates a situation, right? So a new kind of language, and quite foreboding. So want to get your thoughts on how the trilat should begin to conceptualize the possibility that, when we think of simultaneity, as was brought up earlier, we're constantly thinking about a potential Taiwan scenario, and then also what if there's a contingency on the peninsula and China enters into the fray? But what about Russia, right? So that's just another aspect that now the trilat is going to have to contend with. So over to the panel for any of your thoughts.
I'll jump in just quickly here. Traditionally you read statements, you see statements like this and you just want to sort of like roll your eyes, about how hostile it is. But it is alarming. And also, if you want to jump for a second into a devil's advocate role, really devil's advocate role here, this just points to sort of the, traditional security dilemma when we're forming into these blocks. They do see this as threatening, and we should see what they're saying is threatening as well. And then the other thing that I would say here is that, I'm a little bit dubious about sort of true DPRK Russia coordination, because I think that probably I think that China was probably unhappy with this display of, camaraderie and cooperation between Kim Jong-un and Putin. China likes to be the one that has, the most control over the regime in Pyongyang. So I think that just, it scrambles things more than is comforting for Beijing in some ways. That's not a super coherent answer to that, but that's the kind of dynamics that we have going on in the region now. And it is alarming.
That's a very good point. Okay, Junya, do you have anything?
Well, I don't think the North Korea and Russia will take joint action when something happens on the Korean Peninsula and take a joint action in this region. But as we also know that according to some media report, the Putin and Kim Jong-un agreed to military cooperation in giving some military technology from the Russia to North Korea. So this kind of indirect military cooperation will happen, but I don't think the direct joint military action will happen in this region between with North Korea and South Korea. And China's response regarding to the Russia-China current relations, yes, on the one hand, China does not want the very close relationship between the North Korea and Russia. But at this point, another point is that China may have a positive evaluation that because the China may reduce the effort which China must take in supporting North Korea by Russia, the Russia is taking now give some support to North Korea.
Right. And yeah, and just before I turn over to Chelsea for our audience questions, just to put a point on how game-changing Russian military cooperation with North Korea can actually be. So one capability that Russia has that North Korea really badly wants, and we know this, Kim Jong-un talks about it, is MIRVs, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, something that North Korea has struggled to develop, right? And if they were able to get MIRV technology from Russia, that's the ability to, on a single missile, now you've got multiple targets. They could be decoys or they could all have nuclear payloads. And then the problem with that is that now we're talking about a situation where actually, Katrin, I'm stealing your line here from your foreign affairs article with Victor Cha, right? The alliance ballistic missile defense can very quickly get overwhelmed if North Korea has a serious arsenal of MIRV enabled ICBMs. That is really problematic. And then we get into these cycles that you spoke about earlier, Emma, where we need to then, to maintain deterrence, increase our ballistic missile defense systems, and then North Korea, China, and Russia see that as a threatening behavior and then need to escalate as well. So one of these really, really dangerous situations, and Russia could tip us in that direction. So with that, I want to turn it over to Chelsea and get to the audience questions.
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you also to our panelists. This has been a really insightful and engaging conversation. And I know our audience really is excited to hear even more. So I'll jump into some of the questions we have here, and anyone feel free to also jump in with any of your thoughts. We have two questions from Reika Koo at Harvard University. We've touched a bit on both of these topics, but if anyone has any more final thoughts that they'd like to give, here's your opportunity. The first question is about Seoul and Tokyo's bilateral relations, which Junya has talked about, and so has Kuyoun. But if anyone has any more thoughts about the concerns that the fact that both countries don't have a formal alliance treaty raises for the durability of the specific for the durability of the trilateral framework. And yeah, so if anyone wants to tackle that and has any more thoughts on that.
I'll just say that even broaching having a formal alliance treaty between Japan and South Korea would stop this momentum probably dead in its tracks. We've managed to get this far, and having that sort of formal relationship, I think would raise hackles in both capitals. That right now, it's good to have good bilateral relations, but a treaty alliance is a whole different thing. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Well,
anyone?
Yeah. Actually, it is true that Japan and South Korea do not have this formal alliance treaty, but I think it is important to show, audiences in both countries that the cooperation between two countries are pretty beneficial to each other. Showing presences and showing the scene that two countries are working together in terms of North Korea as well as China and regional issues. I think showing that scene is pretty kind of reassuring both audiences in Japan and South Korea. So even though we don't have that formal treaty, I think this giving reassurance, giving understanding about two countries' cooperation important is kind of first step, I think. We don't have to think about formal treaty. I think change the idea of this two countries' cooperation is important. I think.
Yeah. All right. Really great points from the both of you. I guess going along in this vein, and we've touched on
We
this.
might have more. I think.
Oh, yeah. Anyone?
Katrin? No, you shake your head.
Echoing the two, just fusing the two, I think this, the types of cooperation that will come forward from Camp David, to Kuyoun's point, will give, I think for the first time, some real examples that, again, trying to be on the hopeful side, will trickle down to maybe the public of examples of cooperation that politicians can then point to, tangibles, can point to in the kind of political environment. And then to completely agree with Emma, to move too fast in a formal alliance direction right now would actually be counterproductive to being able to kind of conduct this more organic process towards step-by-step greater coordination and trust. Trust is the thing that needs to build along the way. So I agree with both of you, just combining the two.
Yeah, Junya.
Yes, in my observation, in a way, there is a kind of consensus that we, Japan and South Korea, do not need alliance formula, but there's also a kind of consensus. We need a more frequent communication between the two countries. In this context, I really want to see the kind of 2+2 formula holding on the defense minister meeting. So we, Japan and South Korea, respectively have 2+2 formula with other countries, but regarding Japan and South Korea in bilateral context, we don't have the 2+2 formula. This is very, in a way, abnormal situation. I really want to see this kind of the frequent communication mechanism between the Tokyo and the Seoul.
All right. So in the interest of time, I'll ask one more question. We have one from Sarah Santana at Columbia University. She's actually at the Apex Study Center, a really great partner with the Korea Society. So her question is, with the increased tension in other regions in the world, should Japan and South Korea take a more progressive role in leading the forefronts of helping to mediate and resolve international issues in the way that US and other countries in Europe have done? Or should this relationship, should they remain focused on the Asia Pacific alone?
That's a great question.
So anyone feel free to jump in on that.
Well, I think we already have this Asia Pacific 4, like Japan and South Korea already created this unilateral cooperations to help Ukraine crisis, and that's kind of important experience for both countries. We are kind of moving out of this Asia Pacific and also find some area we can contribute to maintain stability in other regions. So of course we cannot immediately using our forces to stabilize the situation, but I think we have to make an experience about helping other countries in other regions in the first place.
I basically agree with Kuyoun, but at this point, because the United States is facing the three front, the Indo-Pacific, Russia, and Middle East. So at this point, I think now Japan and South Korea mainly focusing on the Indo-Pacific region by supporting the U.S. effort in this region and try to how can I say, sustain the U.S. commitment in this region.
Yeah. There are other ways that Japan and Korea contribute to global security. So Korea, through its arms sales to responsible actors such as Poland, and Korea emerging as a global leader in arms sales, actually having a stabilizing effect, in my contention. And then Japan with UN peacekeeping just sends a ton of UN peacekeepers around the world. So that's another way that Japan contributes to global security. So other ways that they're doing this. But I think not to dodge the question, which is, should Japan and Korea a bit more head on? And yeah, that is a tough one.
Yeah, I think Katrin and Emma, did you guys have any thoughts?
You want to go first, Emma?
Well, sure. I mean, as has been pointed out, it's great that Japan and South Korea are signing on, to counter aggression by Russia and other places. But there's plenty to do in the Indo-Pacific region. And as Nishino-san pointed out, the United States is pulled in a lot of different directions right now. And so the support and cooperation that South Korea and Japan can lend to keeping the U.S. engaged and focused on our goals in the Indo-Pacific is probably the most important thing that those countries can do.
Yeah, I guess I'll just kind of echo back to the kind of North Star statement, the common purpose and peace and security in the Indo-Pacific, and kind of maintaining no daylight between the allies. I think particularly in this moment when there is kind of talk about U.S. being challenged on potentially three fronts, certainly supporting to the degree to possible, in any way possible, the U.S. Upholding deterrence in the Middle East is critical. But, it's like the contingencies within East Asia. If something happens, heaven forbid in Taiwan, we also, what do we want Korea to do? Well, we want to make sure Korea is focused also on the Korean Peninsula and keeping that second potential contingency from happening on the Korean Peninsula, right? So there's a parallel here, I think, in terms of the Middle East, which is let's not spread ourselves thin across the globe security wise. I think that there are different kind of connections to Ukraine in terms of international norms and the concern over the immediate implications for deterrence in the Pacific, which made it very important for these two countries to kind of come out, very clearly on Ukraine. That's a bit different in the Middle East situation. So that would just be my kind of take in agreeing. Stay with Junya and with others that really it's imperative to remain focused on the Indo-Pacific right now to maintain deterrence. I just want to bring up one other area of economic security, which is we haven't talked about so much, but that, one really great point that was made by Ambassador Cho in a gathering right after the Camp David summit at a gathering at CSIS was to say, just to focus on the economic heft of these three, that they account for around 30% of total world GDP. And so again, to Yoon's global pivotal state, I mean, I think maybe some of it's the framing, maybe he should call it something else, maybe politically, but these are public goods that he's going around the world and trying to make new strategic relationships with like-minded states that will have an impact in making more secure supply chains and in responding to these, some of these very important economic security issues in the world. And so, again, this is South Korea on the global stage and creating public goods because of the collective heft, because of South Korea's heft, but together with the Trilateral can do a lot in that space as well. So aside from the security piece, which I think is important, I think on the economics piece, there's a lot to be done as well. And sorry. Hope I didn't go on too long.
No, that's perfect. And just to add two more quick points. First, I think it's good to remember that South Korea has joined the United States coalitions in every major conflict since the Korean War, right? Yeah. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, they've been by our side. So when you talk about an ally that's there with the United States, I mean, that's Korea, right? Inside the conflict. But another thing to draw attention to is the fact that these international developments happening outside of the Indo-Pacific are an extension of the inter-Korean rivalry because of North Korea's involvement, A, in arming Russia, and B, there's some evidence that they armed Hamas, right? So in that way, South Korea could face some pressure or some feeling like the inter-Korean rivalry extends to those international conflicts to a certain extent.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question?
Squeeze in one more. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we started talking about this. I think Katrin started bringing up kind of the impact of, actually, let's look at, to round out this conversation, Reika Ku at Harvard University has this one question. We've touched a bit on what the relationship is, what this trilateral cooperation is doing now to kind of help future-proof the cooperation we're seeing today. But if you guys have any ideas of practical steps that Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington could take to really help institutionalize beyond these conversations as well. We've touched on things that are currently happening, but if you have anything in your mind that you feel like would be a step in the right direction in this relationship, please feel free to share.
I wish we could future-proof. Oh, sorry, Katrin. It was spontaneous. I wish we could future-proof, but I don't think that that's possible. Just the fact that we are democracies, but also just global events that happen around us. We're constantly going to be responding to that. And I would just add, we've talked about the U.S., facing 3 different fronts. I think we actually have 4 different fronts because we've got our own internal, fairly toxic domestic politics right now. So that's another, aspect that we're going to have to face if we're going to get to a more stable place. But I think that the steps that we've taken at Camp David and since then are at least some steps in the right direction to baking in some of this institutionalization.
Katrin, I think you had a thought.
I did, and now I think Emma said it very well. Just in terms of how difficult it will be to future-proof this, but I do think that as the world unfortunately gets more uncertain and insecure, it does shift domestic politics as well, and maybe notions of. I think the U.S. has, in many ways, the luxury and maybe undeserved mental luxury of thinking like that conflicts far away are not going to impact us here at home. And I certainly don't hope for this level of uncertainty to reach home. But I think that the more happens, the more that kind of mentality can shift. I think it'll be the job of those who believe in this trilateral to make strong cases to the public for why this does hold. It's not only good for strength at home in the U.S., but it's a strong region and that both are connected. I know that I'm talking in a space that just doesn't really land that well. I'm fully aware of that within U.S. domestic politics. But just as South Korea and Japan, I think, feel this in very real ways. The more insecure the world gets, the more it can, maybe shift. Again, I don't want to be overly optimistic, and I do agree with Emma. This is incredibly hard. But the more it can kind of shift conceptions of what we need in the world to deal with all this uncertainty and increasing and spreading volatility, violence, and we're now in this range of actual war again, right? So it'll be an interesting, to state it, I guess, nicely, electoral season here in the United States. But I'm hopeful there can be a more informed conversation around this that really does make a case for alliances. That my hope of all hopes, in some bipartisan sense, that can recreate that notion that this is valuable and that resonates. That's at least my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really great note to end on. Hope for this relationship, and also just continued sustained steps towards cooperation as we deal with a more insecure and unstable world. If that is all from our panelists, I want to give a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today and chatting with us.
Junya had a...
Oh, Junya. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, Junya, please go ahead.
No. I just want to say that the three countries agreed a lot at Camp David. Now they all agree that the implementation is really important at this point. And regarding the agreement, this Trilateral Youth Summit will be held next year in Busan. This kind of the young generation is really important. Another aspect is that now there's still the many perceives trilateral cooperation as a kind of very military cooperation, but we need to make more effort on the peace side, peacemaking and peace building. In this context, fortunately, three countries agreed to consultative body on the developmental assistance, especially in the Pacific. So I really want to say that we three countries need try to make more effort, not only on the military cooperation, but also in the peace building and peacemaking effort in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for those thoughts. Does anyone else, sorry to cut you off there as well. Does anyone else have anything to say to that? I really like the idea of going in a more peaceful direction for the cooperation as well. All right. Okay, I think that concludes our program for today. I want to thank you all again for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this very important cooperation and relationship. And I also want to thank all of our viewers for joining us today. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to our policy interns here in our policy department at the Korea Society and the Korea Society's media and IT teams for helping everything run smoothly. And I'd like to say, if you enjoyed watching today's program, I really implore you to go over to the Korea Society's website, koreasociety.org, for more of our sessions, and please stay tuned for more coming up. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Great job.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, everybody. Have
Thank
a wonderful
you.
day. Thanks for
Thanks,
tuning in.
everyone.